Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about choosing the best shock oil for your Slash. We're first going to go over the differences between shock oil weights, between lighter and heavier. Then we'll talk about tuning both the front and rear shocks depending on the type of driving that you're doing. And then lastly, we'll also talk about some tips for adjusting the overall ride height of your Slash. Shock oil is one part of it, but there are other factors that contribute to that. Now, first, we're going to talk about differences between lower weight and heavier weight oils. This is an example of a shock oil that I use by Factory Team, and it is a silicon shock oil. And these are rated in weights. They also have CST for reference. So these are 30, 40, and 50 weight oils. When tuning your Slash, these are probably going to be the most common sizes or weights of oils that you will be using. Now, a 30 weight oil is much thinner than a 50 weight oil. So the number of the weight refers to the thickness of the oil. And how this factors into your Slash is a thicker oil will provide more resistance, more dampening, slow down the compression of your shocks, whereas a thinner oil will provide less resistance and allow the shocks to compress more easily. So what happens if your shock weight is too low? Well, basically, that can allow your shocks to compress too easily. And what it can do is it can allow your wheels to bounce, so you lose stability. And also allow your shocks to compress quicker after landing for jumps, so your Slash will bottom out more easily. And also when turning or braking, it could allow the front end to compress too easily, which ends up diving the front end of your Slash. Alternatively, if you have too heavy of a weight of oil, then when you land after a jump, your shocks may not be absorbing all of the impact. Some of that impact may end up going to your wheels or your axles. And then when you're handling your vehicle, it may be providing too stiff of a support and not allowing your wheels to handle bumpy surfaces very well. So that's why it comes down to choosing a balance. And these factors can change depending on your individual Slash. In other words, how do you drive your Slash? How heavy is your Slash? Maybe you have aftermarket or a lot of metal parts that are adjusting the weight of your Slash to be heavier as opposed to the standard setup. For instance, the stock setup, you buy a normal Slash 4x4, shocks come with 30 weight oil overall. Now, by most standards, that weight is probably a little too light. A standard 40 weight oil all around for both the front and the rear wheels seems to provide generally the best performance overall. Now, let's talk about the impacts of shock oil on the front versus the rear. For the front end, the shock oil basically affects traction. So if you're driving in a lower traction surface, or maybe it's a very bumpy surface, then a lower, thinner oil would be preferred to allow your wheels and your shocks to react to that more quickly. However, if you're driving on a high traction surface, such as pavement or asphalt, then a normal or even a thicker weight oil may be preferred because your wheels are not having as much movement, and that can provide better traction. Now, for the rear of the Slash, the weight basically affects the same principles, both the grip and the handling. So some may prefer a slightly thinner weight in the rear to allow for more traction and better grip. Even on the 4x4 setup, most of the power delivery is going to your rear wheels. So having more grip for your highest power delivery part of your car can be preferred. Alternatively, if you do a lot of jumping and you're coming down from high jumps, then not only may you need thicker shock oil, but you may also need bigger shocks to absorb that impact more easily. To summarize, basically, heavier oil allows for more dampening. Lighter, thinner oil allows for more grip. So when tuning your slash, it's a balance between those two fields. A standard setup for an overall stock slash, 40 weight all around is a pretty good place to start. From there, you can tune it. You can try in the rear, maybe going with a 30 weight solution to see if that gives you a little bit more power or better handling. Alternatively, if you're driving mainly on road surfaces or asphalt, you can still either stay with a 40 weight oil, but you can try 50 weight perhaps in the front to see if that improves your handling. Now, if you're strictly bashing, just going for big jumps, and that's your thing, then 50 weight oil all around may be better because that'll provide you with a little bit more cushion for landing those jumps. Now, if you're going for huge jumps, huge air, then you may even need heavier or thicker oil than 50. They make weight 60, 70, and higher. However, with the stock shocks, 50, maybe 60 would be the highest you'd want to go. 50 would be recommended. If you go too much higher than that, you're going to risk popping your shock caps after a big jump because it's just too much pressure for your shock caps to handle. You can, of course, upgrade to the aluminum shock caps, but at that point, if you're really serious about jumping, then it's probably better to go with a improved shock, like the big bore shocks or the GTR shocks. Those will be able to handle that type of impact much better. There's also a lot of good information online, so you can do research on maybe your slash setup, how you drive, to see if other people have experiences in the same way. Most of the recommendations you'll see will have a slightly lower shock weight in the rear, and again, that's kind of balanced, better power delivery in the rear, and then also better handling in the front. But you can kind of play around with it. If you get a sample of 30, 40, and 50 weight oil, that should cover your needs pretty nicely. This stuff at your local hobby shop is only about $3 to $4 each. Online, like on Amazon, you'll probably pay closer to $8 or $10 to have it shipped. But if you have a local hobby shop, I suggest you just go there to pick it up. Also, it's worth mentioning that different brands will have slightly different weights. So it's good to stick with the same brand consistently. So that way, you know that you're getting a comparable weight to each other. All right, so that basically covers the differences in shock oil. And again, if you have any questions, please leave them below. It's kind of a, not really a complicated subject, but it is a little nuanced because everybody's setup is a little different. But in most cases, 30 and 40 weight will probably get the job done for you. If you have a little bit heavier or you need a little bit more dampening, then 50 oil can do that for you. Now, as far as adjusting the ride height of your vehicle, that mainly comes down to how your shocks are installed and the springs of your shocks. Springs are too stiff, then you're basically going to be keeping your slash at max ride height, and that doesn't allow for any give for uneven surfaces. Ideally, hopefully this will come through on the camera okay. This is the front of my slash. But you basically want the front wheels to be about there. Either directly level or a little bit above level. And what that does is it allows for travel room both up and down. Your shocks are constantly riding that high. There's no room for your wheels to go down any further. So that's why if you want them just below the center line, That way you have a positive stance on your slash. That's what I recommend. Same for the rear. You basically want the tires to be a little bit above the level line. And I'll try to show that with some graphics because it may be hard to see with this angle on the slash. Now there's also some tests you can do, like drop test. You want to make sure that your ride height is consistent, not just sitting on a flat surface, but after you drop the slash. So a lot of people will recommend you can pick your slash up, about 2 to 3 feet. It doesn't have to be too high. Drop the slash and then see where the resting, how the control arms rest. And that'll give you a more accurate representation of your real ride height. Now, and it's perfectly normal on a decent drop for your chassis bottom to hit the floor. So having a little bit of chassis slap is okay. I wouldn't be too concerned about that. However, if your chassis is hitting the ground very easily or it's regularly bottoming out, then that's not good. That's not ideal. So the way to fix that would either be stiffer springs. You have the spring shock spacers. You can try adding spacers to it, and that'll provide a little bit more cushion, and a slightly heavier shock oil could help with that as well. I hope these tips kind of help you choose the right shock oil for your slash. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe for more RC content, and we'll see you on the next video.